So after the break-in process, so now, we've gotten past the 500 miles, we've done everything we're supposed to do. Now we're ready to go wheeling, or we're ready to do these trails or go mudding or whatever people do. What does the maintenance look like when you get a regear?
So basic maintenance for your axles is I'm going to recommend, everybody has a little bit of differences, and when in doubt, fall back on your factory manual. I'm going to recommend that at a bare minimum, you're changing, if you're wheeling on a regular basis, driving every day, you're going to want to service that gear oil every.
Hi, I'm Janet with Precision Graphics and Marketing, and I'll be your host on this episode of Chic Chat. I'm the lonely B team member today. Natalie is out doing some traveling to wheeling. She's, I think, headed out to Moab this week. So we'll hear some fun travels from that. The Chic Chat is the place where we celebrate the perfect fusion of style and adventure. Jeeps have long been synonymous with ruggedness, freedom, and the spirit of adventure. And who says women can't embrace all that and more? Today, we're interviewing Greg from Platinum Drive Trainworks. Greg is an avid off-roader who favors extreme rock crawling. And when I say extreme, it's extreme. He's a dedicated husband and father to 5 kiddos whose ages are 21, 19, 11, 6, and 18 months. He's a gear and axle expert, fabricator, and all-around well-seasoned mechanic. His professional career covers over 3 decades of experience in multiple fields related to performance automotive work. Greg is currently the lead tech for Platinum Drive Trainworks, the newest addition to the Platinum off-road family, specializing in gear and axle applications. Platinum Drive Trainworks is located in Huddo, Texas, which is near Austin. And there's not that many drivetrain specific shops around, and Platinum Drive Trainworks serves a wide terrain and wide application. And from what I understand, there's even a construction trencher axle in the shop currently. You can find Platinum Drive Trainworks on Facebook and Instagram under the same name. So welcome, Greg. Thanks for joining us on Chic Chat.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I guess we'll just jump into this. What is the purpose of regearing? Is it fuel efficiency, off-road? Is there a balance between the two? Why would anybody come to you and say, do I need a regear, and what do I do?
So the whole point of regearing for most applications, and it's because at the drivetrain shop, it's street, it's off-road performance. We handle everyday repairs, just normal daily driver stuff. Unique applications like that trencher axle. It's a Dana 70 that's, instead of a regular pinion yoke, it's got a big, it looks like a chain cog. And so a large chain would go around this thing that runs off a hydraulic motor, and it's got 6:17 ratio in it. So it's really slow, unique piece of equipment. All kinds of different applications, but all in all, it's about restoring the things that you were mentioning and improving it. So we'll just use the Jeeps as the baseline example. A lot of Jeeps, not counting the 392s from the factory, will come with a less than desirable power plant, if you will. They're not, your V6s, your straight fours, stuff like that, for most modern Jeeps, are not really well known for making all kinds of horsepower and torque. And so when you add extra weight to a vehicle like a Jeep with bumpers and winches and recovery gear and passengers, and then you add bigger tires and you're doing all this stuff, we have to be able to basically, the best way to describe it is trick the engine and transmission and transfer case into believing it still has stock trim on it. So it's mechanical advantage. The higher the number of a given ring and pinion ratio, the more reduction you're going to see. And by reduction, we're talking about reducing the input torque, or RPMs, but we're increasing the available torque is what we're doing. So it's mechanical. Think like if you've ever used a 3/8 drive ratchet wrench to pull the doors off your Jeep. Do that versus using like a 2-foot breaker bar with a 1/2-inch drive. It's mechanical advantage. And gears basically do the same thing. So you take your average Jeeper, they buy one stock, they do a few things to it, and then they decide, they go on their first ride or they go to their first meetup, like, I want 37s, I want the bumpers, I want the winch. Well, now your factory gear ratio is not going to be sufficient to push all that around. And there's different ways to decide on the math that we will use with customers to determine the best ratio for their application. Tire size is just one of them. curb weight, what you're doing with the rig 99% of the time. The Jeeper that's going out in the desert and wanting to bomb up and down sandy whoopy trails at 50 miles an hour is obviously going to have a different ratio, different powertrain than somebody like me that's going ultra low and slow extreme crawling versus the person that's doing, weekend warrior stuff where they go out once in a while to do some mild trail driving, but they're daily driving their Jeep. So we can focus in on fuel economy, restoring performance. We can do all those things, but you can also lean in one direction a little bit more than another, given your particular application. So it's absolutely a very important and critical modification to make pretty much for any off-road vehicle, any four-wheel drive, and two-wheel drives as well. For like if you have a tow truck, your truck. If you have a truck, like the owner of Platinum Off-Road up now, he's got a big turbo diesel with a really nice trailer, and if the gear ratio didn't match, for the engine transmission, what he's doing in that truck, he's not going to have any fun pulling things around with that big old trailer. So all of these things are key factors, and it's absolutely, it's worth doing a little bit of your own homework. Don't always just take the, I don't like calling myself an expert because I'm always learning things. Most axles are the same nuts and bolts wise as far as how they work, how they operate, but there's subtle differences, and you have to be open-minded about it and not just take somebody at their word for it. I will say this, and it might be sound a little critical, but if it's a big shop, a big, and I'm not going to say names, but like a nationwide chain of off-road upgraders, there's a service writer in there that's just trying to move parts to make his commission. You don't want to talk to that guy.
Right.
You want to talk to people on the trail that you meet that have modifications similar to what you desire. People that have already been down that road and be like, how do you like this ratio versus what your stock ratio was? Because again, you might not like what somebody else is doing. Like in my case, what I've got's not for everybody. If you want to drive it every day, you're probably not going to go as extreme as I went with the choices I made for my upgrades and my ratios. So it is a balancing act. You want all the best of all worlds. You really do. But you also want to make sure that you're dialing in for what you intend to do with the vehicle on a regular basis. That way it's effective money spent and not just bragging rights for how much you dumped into the bill. So
Right. We don't just want to talk about dollar amounts. We want to talk about the functionality of the Jeep and what you want to do with it, whether you're going off-road or you're doing both, nice balance, or you're just dedicating that Jeep just to rock crawling. So let's talk about what the Jeep that you have. So size tires and your drivetrain and all that stuff.
Okay, so
I already know,
mine's a 2017 JKU. Started life brand new. I bought it February 17. I've owned it ever since. It was a baseline sport. Dana 30 front end, Dana 44 rear, 3.6 V6 with a standard transmission. Now, I did choose it specifically because it had the standard transmission, and then a regular transfer case. No lockers, no frills, no nothing. And I did that on purpose, knowing that I was going to upgrade it. And over the years, since I purchased it, the first couple of years I had it, I basically kept it stock just for factory warranty's sake. Once the factory warranty went off, it's okay. All bets are off. Now I can start modifying. So in its current iteration, it's sitting on custom Dana 80 axles, both ends that I did most of the work. I have to give credit, shout out to my buddy Austin Sterling at TTR Custom Fab and Axle. He did do the pre-assembly on the front housing as far as the center section tubes and smaller components, and then I finished out the rest. Custom truss, did all the gearing, the lockers. So my tire size, I'm currently rocking, it is a 45-inch, 1450 section width, 17-inch wheel, Super Swamper, made by Interco, SX2. It's a very big, aggressive, heavy-duty, badass tire. This is the second gen. They did take them off the market for a short period of time to reformulate the rubber compounds and get caught back up on production. So I like to refer to these as second generation. They are wicked awesome. So much fun. It's almost like cheating. To have a tire that big, it's almost cheating. But at the same time, the axles that I have are so large as far as their displacement. There's just a big axle. I need big tires to maintain realistic ground clearance and still get things done on the trail. So it's a custom 3-link suspension front and rear that I've done all myself. And it's kind of a mix. I've got some RPM steering stuff under there. I'm running Adams drive shafts, 1410 front and rear. They're the extreme duty ones. It's got disc brake swaps. I've got a Willwood lightweight disc brake kit on the front. I've got disc brake from lug nut 4x4 on the back conversion. It's seen a lot, and it's currently under the knife right now for a 6 OLS swap because the factory V6 finally, after several years of abuse, finally gave up. That was about the last thing that was left that was stock besides the transmission. I had to also swap transfer cases several years ago, so it does have a Rubicon 4-to-1 ratio transfer case in it. And there's a whole slew of other stuff, but it's an ongoing, constant, evolving thing because you keep doing things to shore it up as best you can for what I'm doing with it. And when you find the next weak link, well, then it's got to go, and you put something bigger, stronger, better, keep rocking. The trade-off is I do drive mine when it's running. I do drive it daily. I don't trailer my rig. I don't tow it. And it's been all over the country, places that, most people wouldn't imagine going to and actually trying to, wheel and then drive it back home. It's been crisscross applesauce back and forth, East Coast, West Coast, North, South, a bunch since 2017. So, but it's fun. The kids and the wife love it. Sometimes they want me to push things a little harder than I feel comfortable, and other times I want to push it harder than they feel comfortable. So, but it works out good because everybody really enjoys it, and just meeting up with our friends and getting to make friends and all that kind of stuff. It's always a good time, and it's the most. You've heard the old saying or the memes. It's the most fun you can have at 2.5 miles an hour.
Exactly in second gear. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And Natalie and I talk about this a lot on the show, is when you get wheeling and you find your circle of people that you wheel with, it really is like meeting up with family. If you really trust those people and you have, camaraderie with them, it's, you're spending a whole weekend with these people because you're not, nobody has off-road parks right next to them. So especially I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but you're down, you have Hidden Falls right there, but I'm sure wheeling that over and over and over again, you get bored with it.
Yeah. I started wheeling the Hidden Falls area. It was back when it was still Boulder Creek. So if you go back to like 2006, 2007, was when I first started visiting there. And we had family that had relocated. I was originally from Amarillo before I relocated to Central Texas in 2011. But, for years I was coming down here to wheel. And at that time I had a 2005 Rubicon LJ with the manual transmission in it. But it was kind of a baby Jeep compared to what I'm in now. Back then it was 35s with a long arm Rubicon Express kit, and it was nicely appointed, but it wasn't an extremely built rig, but it was very capable. I started out, mud bogging, dirt biking, like if you go back way back, and I'm going to date myself here. I was on a 70cc Honda 3-wheeler by the time I was 7, 8 years old. And it just progressed from there. And it was probably, I want to say, late 90s where I got away from the mud bog, big mud truck type stuff and got more into, crawling, trail riding. And then, ultimately like Jeep became that was like, if you're going to do that kind of wheeling, that's the rig, it was, and I've just kind of stuck with it. And I've owned all different ones. I've had Scouts, I've had Broncos, full-size Blazers, pickup trucks. I've done all of that. And the Jeeps have just kind of always been that sweet spot for me because they're capable enough as is, but once you really start putting things into them and making good choices for your upgrades and modifications, the sky's the limit. There's no stopping one if it's done right. And again, the camaraderie, the community is always awesome for the most part. You have a few rotten apples here and there that want to spoil people's fun, but overall, it's like you can go anywhere and meet other Jeepers that are going to be just as awesome as somebody that you've known your whole life. And that's right off the bat. And that's an amazing feeling to know that no matter where I go, I can count on somebody. No matter what the experience level is, no matter how long they've been doing it, whatever, you're going to meet people like yourself that really just love it for what it is, love the community. And that part's one of the best things. You can't say enough about there's a lot of shops, there's a lot of charities, there's a lot of clubs that do such awesome and wonderful things. It's worth noting. And not for the attaboys, not for the pats on the back. It's just they're doing good things. Right. And while we're doing that, we get to have fun with our Jeeps. So it's like the best of both worlds, You can't think of that. So
it really is. So I didn't even realize we started off with the same Jeep. So my Jeep Charlie is a 2017. JKU. It's an Oscar Mike edition, which is basically the Sport. It just like has fancy seats. So I think it started off with the 373.
The seats, but yeah.
Yeah, it has the little badge on the side, and it has it's embossed in the seat. I mean, it's the Oscar Mike edition. But I think it started off, and I could be wrong, but I try to do research on this, and there's different answers everywhere you look, but I think it started off with 373s. And so obviously I've re-geared since then. But for somebody that's just getting into wheeling, they buy a stock Jeep off of the lot. You mentioned that you didn't modify yours for a couple years. What's the first thing people say when they want to upgrade? I want 35s and a 2.5-inch lift or 3.5-inch lift. When you look at these Jeeps and they want to do these lifts or they want to get bigger tires, 35s, 37s, or 40s, how do you go about the ratio selection?
So the ratio selection is going to be based on some of the points that we covered, previously. My first thing is, what are you going to do with it 99% of the time? If it's going to go up and down the road, you're using it to go back and forth to work, you're using it for road tripping, then my focus for that particular application is really going to narrow down on maximizing reliability and fuel economy and comfort. So the thing to remember is that the higher the number, and which it's confusing for a lot of people when they first start looking into gearing, because you hear deeper gears versus like highway gears, but then you see that the deeper gears are a numerically higher number and the highway gears are a numerically lower number. So it gets confusing really fast. And the easiest way to describe it is that number represents the amount of turns that the pinion gear has to rotate via the drive shaft coming out of the back of the transfer case or transmission into two-wheel drive. That pinion gear has to rotate X amount of times to get one rotation out of the ring gear one time, which transfer the power to the axle shafts, ultimately to the wheels and tires. So the more turns of that pinion, like let's just pick 456s. It's going to be 4.56 revolutions, turns of the pinion to get one revolution of the ring and pinion, or the ring gear, translating to one revolution of the wheel and tire. So for somebody that is a casual wheeler, light duty trails, they're going to go down to the beach once in a while. They're going to go out to Big Bend or places like that where they don't need a super low ratio for crawling, like legit rock crawling. We're even on a 37-inch tire, we're normally going to be picking a ratio that's going to maximize fuel economy, give them that restored factory performance, but we're not going to go overboard, because the worst thing you can do if you're driving it on the street all the time or up and down the highways, you don't want to pick a ratio that is so high, numerically high, geared so low that your engine RPMs are running in an excessive amount, because the higher you're revving the engine and the transmission, the faster you're wearing it out. So your longevity goes out the window, your fuel economy goes out the window, repair bills go up, and it's just not any fun to drive because you can't maintain those higher, like if you've ever been on the toll roads in Central Texas, like 130, the posted speed limit's 85, and ain't nobody going 85. They're all
that is the absolute minimum.
That's the minimum. It's not a limit, it's the minimum. So, the flip side of that coin is a rig like mine. Yeah, there's times I'm going to use some wheel spin to, you've heard people talk about the bump or bounce over an obstacle or something, a little momentum. But for the most part, I want mine to have as much control at those lower RPMs as I can to really work over those big boulders and rocks, because unless you're racing, if you're going against the clock or racing another vehicle, we're not really in a hurry to go up those big gnarly rocks. We want to get up in one piece and keep the tire side down. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but
sometimes it doesn't.
That selection, you really have to be honest with yourself as a consumer. What you want from the vehicle, what you expect from it, and then work with somebody that has enough time in the game to be able to ask those questions. And that would be what I would tell you. If you came to me and I didn't work for a gear shop and you said, Greg, what kind of gears should I put in my Jeep? I want 37s. And I go, well, you probably want to go with brand XYZ because I read on the internet somewhere, or some guy on TikTok or some influencer said, no, if they don't ask you the right questions immediately, they don't have your best interest in mind. They're just going to sell you a part. So that's where educating ourselves as consumers is so very important, so that going into it, at least some of the basics. So understanding why we don't want our engine RPM super high at highway speeds, why we don't want the transmission getting overly hot on the trail. If you've ever had somebody accidentally leave their Jeep in 4 low when they come out of a trail and get on like a park road or in a parking lot and they try to take off, and what does it do? The Jeep's going 5 mile an hour, but the transmission and the motor are going, they're screaming and they go, oh no, what I do? Think of it in those terms. That's the same thing that's happening while you're going down the highway. If you're not geared properly for your tire size, the vehicle curb weight, the amount of power and torque you have on tap, and all those other factors. So it's not as cut and dried as some people make it sound. But it's not that complicated either.
And I think that's where a lot of people get confused, and you'll see it on the Facebook posts, the Jeep clubs, what should I do? And I just want to do this. And you'll get, for as many people that respond, you're going to get that many different answers. And so it's hard for, like when I first came, when I had my Jeep, I didn't wheel it for a year and a half. I had no idea. I didn't know anything about off-roading. And it wasn't until I got rear-ended and, took it to the shop and was asked, well, what do you want to do with it? I was like, well, I want to learn how to off-road. I've been doing this, off-roading for 2 years, and which I'm still new. I don't have as much seat time, but I've learned so much in the past 2 years. And I think it can be intimidating for women to ask that question, especially in a lot of these Jeep forums, because they may get torn down, talk down to, it's the old adage of, women go into a car shop, right? A mechanic shop, and they feel like they're going to be taken advantage of. So it is important to have people like you yourself come on these episodes and talk about it, so that way they're more educated on it. But you made a good point earlier when you said you want to trick the Jeep into thinking it's back to stock. Now, having said that, when you get new gears, does it mean you're free to act like it's stock, like drive down the highway like it's stock? We have some pictures that Tony will post up in post-production, but we have some pictures comparing some really great looking gears and gears that have been overheated. And can your mechanic really tell what you've been doing? And if you lie to them, can they really tell? So what can we do with our new gears?
So that's there's like 3 kind of points there I want to cover. So effectively, yes, if things are done in a certain manner and done correctly, you can just go out and start driving the vehicle however you want. The key points there are you have to make sure that your suspension, your alignment, your wheel and tire choices, all those things are obviously dialed in correctly and up to snuff, in good condition. And you have to choose what is known in the industry as REM isotropic refinishing. It is a micro polish process that several of the large manufacturers offer, and there's other outfits that do it just on its own. You don't have to necessarily get it from a particular brand. There's outfits, there's several around the DFW area. There's a couple down here by me that they just offer that as one of the things they do. They don't make the gears in-house, but they can do that. So the REM isotropic, also known as ISF, it is a micro polish refinish that is done to the surface of the gears. It's not a coating. It's not like a heat treat. It is a micro polish. And for most people, the biggest plus is that you don't have to do a break-in on the gears when that has been done to them for you. That's huge. Secondly, it can lower operating temperatures. Thirdly, it will extend the service life of the components, because you can REM treat almost any metal component. It doesn't just apply to gears. You can do it on all kinds of stuff. And there's a lot of benefits. Now, the actual process and all the chemistry involved and all that, I'll spare you all the gory details, but people can look it up. It is an awesome thing. It does add an additional cost. Most outfits have a price point that they charge for that service per gear set. Now, going into the second part of your question, when you get new gears, no, if you didn't get RSF, if you went with just a standard gear install, okay. If you have a gear job done and you want to be able to go out and just start driving and wheeling and towing and doing all your normal stuff with it without having any concerns about break-in procedure, then the option that a lot of manufacturers have is called REM isotropic micropolish, otherwise known as ISF. This procedure, basically, it's not a coating, it's not a heat treat, it's none of those things. It is it's a micro polish procedure that they put on the gears that allows you to skip your break-in. It promotes lower operating temperatures for gears and a differential upwards of 20 or 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to significantly prolong the service life of the components. And there's a whole bunch of other fringe benefits that are enjoyed by having that done. You can also have it done on other components. It is not just for ring and pinions. And there's outfits locally by most major metropolitan areas that will offer that service independent of any manufacturer. So you've got a lot of wiggle room there to get it done. If you don't want to spend the extra money to have that service performed for your new gears, because most outfits, if they're selling you the gear and offer that service, there is an uptick in the price. Like Revolution Gear and Axle, for example, charges $100 per gear set to RSF their products. So if you opt not to do that, it is important to know that there is a break-in procedure for new ring and pinions. And it doesn't matter what you drive, it's the same across the board. We have to see, and I'm going to give you the short and curly version. We have 3 heat cycles. You can do 2. I like to recommend 3. And a heat cycle is basically driving the vehicle in normal conditions, no highway speeds, no rock crawling, no towing, no drag racing, no throttle dumps, no shock loading. And we want to try to keep the speed under 50, 55, varying those speeds, and limit the drive to about 20 minutes or so. And then you let it cool off. You drive it 15, 20 minutes, park it, let it cool off. Minimum hour, hour and a half. And what that does, because we've got brand new gears, all brand new bearings, that extra heat that's being generated by the gears taking their new facing, we don't want to exceed the operating temp of the gear oil. Because if you do that, it is going to burn things up. It is going to cause problems. And you had mentioned some photos that you've got that show the difference between a properly broken in gear versus one that was not properly broken in.
Right.
There's no way to cheat it. Like you mentioned in your question, you can't lie about it. It is a very obvious thing on the face of the gear teeth and on the bearings. So if I send somebody down the road, and say, okay, here's your break-in instructions, and the ones that I give out through the shop, it's a long list and very, very specific. You have to do the heat cycles. Then at the finish of the heat cycles, we're going to try to get another 300 or 400 miles on those gears. Again, normal operating conditions, no burnouts, no towing, no drag racing, no shock loading, no rock crawling, no mud bogging, none of that stuff, just regular driving. But during the latter portion, you are allowed to go highway speeds. It is key to note, common sense goes a long ways. If you are in a part-time four-wheel drive vehicle, you do not want to go down the highway at 75 or 80 miles an hour with the thing in four-wheel drive. Don't do that.
Right.
Use common sense. Now, if it is a vehicle that is designed like an all-wheel drive type setup, well, then that's okay. You can do that because it's designed to do that. That transfer case is meant to be that way. But a part-time transfer case, we generally, for most normal applications outside of competitive use, we do not recommend going down the highway in full drive. So what do? If you didn't get the REM and now you're stuck having to break in your front gears, you take your time. You have to be patient about it. You find dirt roads, backcountry roads, places where you can keep the speeds down to reasonable use for 4 high, never in 4 low, and get those heat cycles and that load on the gears. And that's where the heat is generated by having load. Sticking your car on jack stands and just letting it spin in gear is not really putting load on it. I've read and seen and heard of people doing that. I don't recommend it personally. I don't recommend it professionally, unless you're just in a really tight spot and you understand the consequences of your actions. So,
right. That thought would have never even crossed my mind.
people do some funny things trying to get away with stuff, but yes, if you do not do the break-in properly, you will void any and all warranty from the manufacturer and from the shop doing the install. Nobody's going to touch it. And we're going to know. Again, you've got photos that you've got to see already that we'll get to show everybody else at some point, that you'll see the difference, and it's pretty obvious. The face of that ring and pinion, where those teeth make contact, it is a metal-on-metal contact, and if you basically grab the ring gear and rock it back and forth against the pinion, you'll hear it go tink, 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 or, we call that backlash in the industry. That is the amount of clearance between the teeth on the pinion head, the gear that's rotating this way, versus the teeth on the ring gear that's rotating this way. And the whole point of a hypoid gear, they call them hypoid gear sets. It is a transfer of torque from one plane of operation to another plane of operation. That's all it is. The bigger the teeth, the bigger the bearings, the bigger the gear set, the stronger it is and the more abuse it will take. So when folks, and I'm not picking on anybody, but I'm sure you've heard it. Well, my Dana 30 on 37s does great. Well, if it's doing good for that person and their application, what they're doing for it, that's awesome. But like you mentioned earlier, we're newer wheelers, especially, and I'm not picking on anybody, but female wheelers, you have to sort through all the litany of comments that you get when you ask a question like that, above and beyond just the people that want to run their mouths or don't know what they're
Right.
talking about. You'll get somebody like that. Well, I've got, 513s in my Dana 30 and I rock 37s and I've never broken anything. Well, that's awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
That person's level of sincere wheeling is probably not on the same level as somebody like me, because
Right.
I'll trash a Dana 30 in 20 minutes if you turn me loose with one. But no, it's very, very important that you follow those break-in procedures, do it correctly, because obviously if you void your warranty, now you're having to pay somebody to do it all over again. And gear jobs aren't exactly cheap.
No,
Even the
not.
lesser expensive places, it's not cheap. It's not something you want to have to do numerous times. It's hard enough for most of us to bite the bullet, getting a winch or a set of tires or something like that. It's like, man, that's a big ticket item all up front. Gear job is pretty sincere. So you want to do it right. Do right by yourself and the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Take care of that as instructed. It's very, very important. And you'll be a whole lot happier in the long run if you do it correctly instead of trying to rush through it just in a hurry to get somewhere. Do your shop, your installer, a favor. Oh, sorry, bumped the table there. Don't plan a wheeling trip for the same week that you want your gears installed or that you want your suspension installed or any of that. Don't do that. That's
Right.
Show some respect and kindness to your installers and to your favorite shop, because those guys are busting their butts, and girls. Don't do that. If you can help it, don't do that.
Right. I have a wheeling trip
No.
next weekend. Can you get my rig in on Monday and I can pick it up Friday and just go wheeling?
It can happen, but most of the time, the reality is with schedules and parts, getting parts from wholesalers or other suppliers, and stuff happens. It's life. Things happen. So it's
not a
better to
cookie
plan
cutter
ahead
concept.
well in advance, and there's all kinds of caveats to it as well. Programmers, that's a huge one that it's real easy to overlook as a newer wheeler if you don't realize that a late model Jeep absolutely requires reprogramming for a gear ratio change. The Jeep is not going to drive right if you don't, because all the computers and the wheel speed sensors, transmission input and output speed sensors, body control module, your transmission control module, all these things are talking to each other. And if you take one part of that equation and flip it on its head, well, now everything else is going to go into panic mode. Like,
Right.
you can put a bigger set of tires on a late model Jeep without doing programming, but what that'll do is throw off the accuracy of your speedometer. And, it's not cool. You change the gear ratio, now your shift points have changed, the speedometer has changed as well. The computer's not going to be happy if you don't tell it, hey, we made this change. And that's where the programmer is so important. Entry-level programmers, you can pick those things up for, a plug and play, like through your OBD2 port, which is that little diagnostic port underneath your dashboard. $300 for one of those things, and it'll give you several options: tires, tire size, and what transfer case ratio you have, and the gear ratio, and it gives you those. Then you've got really high-end performance tuners that have the standalone digital displays where you can go in there and fine-tune all kinds of stuff, change the programming on the engine for different things, and so forth and so on. So those additional costs, your post-break-in gear oil change. Because yes, when we're done with the break-in, we have to change the gear oil. We're getting all of that, basically, I don't want to call it contaminated, but there is fine particulate debris suspended in that gear oil that the magnets won't pick up on your drain plugs from breaking in that new ring and pinion and those new bearings. And you don't want to just keep driving around on that. That's why we say 500 miles, most manufacturers. You can fudge it a little bit. If you're at 450, if you're at 600, that's okay. You don't have to stress and think, watching your odometer go 490. Okay, 500. I've got to go straight to the shop. Don't panic. There's a little bit of wiggle room there, but honestly, it's important that you get that done. Some shops charge for that service. Platinum Drive Trainworks, we don't charge for the post break-in gear oil change, with the sole exception being if the customer wants a very specific type of gear oil that we don't normally have on the shelf. If there's some, high-end racing oil or something that they just have to have in there, they're paying for that. But we're not charging another 2 or 3 hours worth of labor to change gear oil and inspect our install. It's part of what you already got from the get-go. And we
Right.
try to make it as seamless and easy for folks as possible. The parent shop to where I work, Platinum Drive Train up by Dallas, Mike will actually, for a lot of his customers, when they install gears up there for Jeeps, he'll do the break-in for you, which is amazing. It's awesome that he has the ability and the time to do that, because a lot of shops can't. They're either too busy, or, like in my case, where I am a one-man show, where I'm at. So as
Mhm.
much as I would love to drive everybody else's stuff all the time and keep the miles off my Jeep, I'm kind of stuck. So it's rare that I get to do it, but there are occasions where I can, and I don't mind helping at all.
Right.
Again, be careful, ladies, on the social media. You have to learn who's being legit with you and who's just blowing smoke and who's just
Right.
running their mouth. So you got to take what you see on the social media stuff with the influencers, the TikTok videos, grain of salt. Again, I highly recommend find somebody that you can meet on the trail that has a rig with some or all of the mods that you desire, so that you can
Mhm.
see it, feel it. And Jeep people are very, very, most of the time, very proud of their rigs and more than willing to answer questions, take you for a ride, let you crawl around
Mhm.
all underneath it, inside it, all that stuff. You just walk up, introduce yourself, and ask. Beyond that, finding a shop that you can trust, which has its own headaches sometimes. It's like social media or anything else.
Right.
You may have to visit 2 or 3 before you find one that makes you feel comfortable. And again, their attitude towards you is a huge red flag if it's not insanely positive right off the bat, because a female walking into an off-road shop by herself to ask the questions you've asked me just on those topics, if
Mhm.
they're not willing to take the time as a service writer or a salesman or somebody to sit down and be like, okay, ask everything that I just asked you, if they just go, well, we got this set up over here, we can get you out the door for this much money, what's your credit
Right.
card number?
Right.
Walk out of that shop.
Exactly. Right.
Walk away from that shop.
And then that client, then you're going to end up coming to you anyway, because they're like, something's not right, and I hear this noise, and what's going on? And it's driving like crap. And you're like, well, they sold you a good, bill of goods. Like they just wanted to get money out of you. Yeah,
You're another invoice. You're not a person. And
exactly.
again, I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but it's a real thing, and it happens a lot.
Right.
And it sucks, but that goes back to the educating yourself and being willing to do your own homework and not just
Right.
take people at face value for what they say.
Right.
So
So I took my truck the other day. It was yesterday actually, to get the oil changed, and I right now I do not have any extra time in my day. I took it someplace to do a quick oil change, and they, of course, they're showing me the air filter. That's my favorite part of it, is they're trying to explain to me what the air filters are doing, and I let them do their spiel, and I'm like, doesn't it look brand new? Like, I just replaced that. So they go to test the battery, and they try to tell me that I have a Dodge Ram 2500, and they try to tell me that it's only, I think it's 400, is it crank volts that it was throwing
cracking
out?
amps.
Cranking amps, there it is.
Yep. Yeah.
And that it needed to be replaced. And I was like, that doesn't sound right. They're like, well, it should be 800. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right. So I do a quick Google search, and I find out that, for a 2500 Hemi, it needs at least 600 to turn
Mhm.
over. And I have not had any problems with this truck. So I'm like, you know what? Just, it's okay. Well, I'll just keep going. I just need the oil change. So I stop at O'Reilly's, and I asked them, and they can't check the crank gaps, but he was like, there's no way your truck would even start if it was 400. He was like, they were just trying to sell you a new battery. And it was ridiculous. Like, and that, I cannot tell you how many times it's happened to me with a battery alone, of people trying to sell me, a $200 battery, thinking that I don't know any different. And so I think it's so vital for women, especially, and, you have some men that were not brought up as mechanics, and maybe they're not mechanically inclined. They have to educate themselves and find themselves a very good shop with good people that are working there that are going to educate them and let them know what's going on. So, it's much appreciated, believe me. So after the break-in process, so now, we've gotten past the 500 miles, we've done everything we're supposed to do. Now we're ready to go wheeling, or we're ready to do these trails, or go mudding, or whatever people do. What does the maintenance look like when you get a regear?
So basic maintenance for your axles is I'm going to recommend, everybody has a little bit of differences, and when in doubt, fall back on your factory manual. I'm going to recommend that at a bare minimum, you're changing, if you're wheeling on a regular basis, driving every day, you're going to want to service that gear oil every 15 to 20,000 miles. That's kind of where I like to be for use. Now, if this
Mhm.
is a rig that you're, and this is the term that's real popular, if it's a trailer queen, it's not something that sees road duty. You put
Right.
it on a trailer, you drag it to the trail, you beat on it, put it back on the trailer, drag it home, and then it sits there for several weeks. That
Mhm.
one, you can change the gear oil on that thing every 30, 40,000 miles or 2
Mhm.
years, whichever comes first, provided that there's nothing else going on. Leaky
Right.
seals, water inclusion from like axle vents or a bad seal, anything
Mhm.
like that that you notice. A lot of people be like, well, if it's still dripping, if it's still leaking, it's got fluid in it, and they don't worry about it. That's a bad way to get, because you get complacent, you get lazy. And if you have fluid coming out of a seal, that means dirt, water, and everything else can go in. So it's a
Right.
two-way street. And if you
Exactly.
spend a lot of time playing in mud puddles, fording through creek beds and stuff, like going to the lake, going to the coast, all of the coast is one of my worst ones that I hate to see people with Jeeps doing, because the
Yeah.
salt is
Right.
so very hard. The corrosion is so hard on our rigs.
Mhm.
Anything that's bare metal or has a scratch on it is going to rust instantly. Anybody that's
Mhm.
been already knows this. So maintenance can include keeping an eye on fluid levels, service intervals, watching out for leaks, watching out for any unusual noises. You know, if you've had a brake start squeaking, or a bearing going back, anything that sounds out of the ordinary, if you listen to your vehicle, it'll talk to you, it'll tell you what it
Mhm.
needs, what it wants. So you
Yep.
have to train yourself. It's like, if you're just blasting down the highway with the volume full tilt boogie and the doors and the t-tops off, every freedom panels are off, and you're just all wind
Right.
and music, you're probably not going to notice anything. No, what's all that? Just turn the radio up. It's Jeeps are supposed to be noisy. Well, no, they're really
No,
not
they're
if
not.
everything's set up properly and in good condition. And I
Right.
don't mean like incidental trim panel squeaks or stuff like that, but
Right. I have
being
that. Yeah.
aware of your scenario. Like I said, if you spend more time down at the beach, Gulf Coast, playing in the sand than you do anything else, well, then you should probably invest in some kind of power washer or something,
Mhm.
or be ready to spend a bunch of quarters at the quarter wash, because you need to be washing that thing on a daily basis to get all that salt out from underneath it and prevent excessive corrosion. Same thing if you play in the mud. If you go out to, like here locally, Hidden Falls, when it's the rainy season, can be a whole lot of fun to slip and slide and play in that mud. Wash your Jeep when you get home. Pre-fight,
Absolutely.
post-fight. If you've learned as a newbie, you know pre-fight, post-fight. We're checking
Yes.
everything before we go out. We're checking it all when we come home, and you have to stay on top of that. If you
Mhm.
don't, if something's going to bite you in the backside at the most inopportune time and ruin your fun
Absolutely.
or cost you a bunch of money. So it's better to
Right.
pay attention to what the rig's telling you visually, auditorily, all those. I don't know, is that a word, auditorily?
It is now.
Yeah, whatever.
Well,
So
I mean, I just came back from Moab, and so coming back, and yes, I did trailer it back, but getting back on the road, because I was trying to save mileage on the Ram did some heavy duty work, so I'm just running around town. But I start hearing this popping or whatever, so I take it back to Platinum Off Road, and I'm like, well, where's all this coming from? So people, I don't think people realize, and those bolts don't stay tight forever. You have to do
nope.
maintenance on the bolts underneath your Jeep. So I had a control arm that was loose, and then I had a shock mount that it had two complete turns to tighten it that had come loose just from wheeling for
Yep.
a week in Moab. So, like, listen to your rig. Of course, I have a drive shaft that's hating life right now, so that's we have one on order. So, but right before we went to Moab or to EJS, I got an e-locker in the back, in the rear, because I had an LSD initially on 40s. Yes, Greg, don't, I already know. I broke the axle shaft, yes, and so now we have an e-locker. But if you're getting in there to do gears, is that a really great time to install? If you don't have a Rubicon, is it a great time to shift into loggers?
Absolutely. Now, again, there are caveats, just like with
Right.
everything else. I'm a big proponent of asking people to spend the time to learn how to wheel the rig in its basic
Yes.
stature before
Yes.
you start dumping a bunch of money into it. You need to understand, it's just wheeling 101. Whatever
Mm-hmm.
kind of wheeling you're doing, it doesn't matter. You need to understand the basics as far as recovery, tools, choosing a line, how to respond or communicate with a spotter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
Right.
if you have done those things and you're at the point where, okay, yeah, I want the bigger tires, I want the flexier suspension, I want the extra traction to go with those tires, I'm going to get rid of my open carrier, I'm going to get rid of my limited slip, and I want a selectable locker. That is an absolute wonderful time to do it, because other than the extra costs, if it's an e-locker, well, there might be a little bit extra labor for most shops like ours, the one I'm at, for switch mounting and running the wiring and all that kind of stuff. If it's an ARB, air actuated locker, there's going to be an air line, there's going to be a compressor that has to be remotely mounted, again, switches and harnesses and all that stuff. So, but as far as the labor to do the gears, most shops don't charge any different. You know, if I'm taking a sport Jeep and I'm putting lockers in it, the only extra labor is just going to be for the wiring and the switches.
Right.
I'm already in there pulling the guts out of it anyway, so I'm not charging any extra to do it. And buyer's remorse, you get the gears, you get them broke in, you go out, you go wheel, and then your one wheel peel in the back on your favorite obstacle, while everybody that you're wheeling with just clicks the switch and they crawl right up it. And you're like, man, I wish I'd got the locker while I was in there. You know, you go, it's one of those things. But like you were talking about, we're going to tie that back in with having too much tire can be a good thing. You know, too much of a good thing. Too much tire can be bad.
Right.
Too deep of a gear ratio can be bad. Too much weight on the vehicle for the given axles that you're running can be really bad. And a lot of folks don't realize that because they see so much as far as the advertising and the social media and the salesman aspect of it, that you've got a Rubicon. Now go slap some 40s on that bad boy, add 600 pounds worth of bumpers and body armor and winch and a roll cage, put all your recovery gear in there, load up the dog, load up the cooler, get the wife and kids, and you went from a 5,500 pound curb weight vehicle, now you're rocking 6,000 plus easily. And you don't realize that for all the modifications you do, even changing the ratio, adding chromoly axle shafts, lockers, all that kind of stuff, the ring and pinion stay the same as far as their size and their composition. All standard ring and pinions are made out of basically the same alloy. There's some race stuff out there that's different for specific applications like drag racing, but you're across the board for most of what we're talking about, it's going to be like an 8620 gear alloy steel. A Dana 44 late model, what they call the M220, if you've read or heard about it, conversations online, that is a designation for the diameter of the ring gear in millimeters. So M220, it's 220 millimeter diameter, which roughly equates to a little over 8.5 inches. It's like 8.6 something inches, right? A Dana 30, also known as the M186, is about a 7.5 inch ring gear. It's a little tiny guy, little bitty teeth on that thing. You have to understand that when those bigger tires are added, when those lockers are added, when those stronger axle shafts are added, when all that extra weight is added, you do a power modification. Let's say you do a V8 swap like I'm doing, or you add a turbo or a supercharge. You want more power for going down the road. Well, you're still asking that same size component to handle all the transfer of torque from the one plane to the other plane. And then you're adding in shock loading from slipping the tire and it grabs you've got one off the ground and it's spinning and then it comes down and bam, it hits. We call that shock loading. That power, that transfer back through the system, if you will, through the drivetrain, it's got to go somewhere. And if every piece of the chain, if you will, from power delivery to the ground and back isn't up to spec for what you're doing, something's going to give. It could be a drive shaft. It'd be like in your case, an axle shaft, or if you have upgraded axle shafts like RCVs, I'm sure you've heard of that brand. The RCV axle shafts are a very, very popular upgrade for most Jeepers because they're strong and they're reliable, and you just have to grease them once in a while, and don't worry about it.
Right.
The trade-off is there's a caveat for everything. Okay. You make the axle shafts basically indestructible for most people. Where does your weak link go? Ring and pinion.
Right.
And if it doesn't go to the ring and pinion, if you have a larger axle, like a 1-ton swap or something, now it goes to the drive shaft where the U-joints and the drive shaft itself is. If you have drive shafts built to take that stress, where does it go? Transfer case. If the transfer case can't handle it, then what's next in line? Transmission. We're getting into components now that if you tear one of those up, big money, absolutely no fun. And if you're out in the sticks somewhere on the trail side and you blow up one of those components, it's not like just throwing another axle shaft in.
Right.
You tear up your transfer case, you can unbolt the drive shaft pretty easily with basic hand tools for most applications, right? And a
Mhm.
lot of people do carry spares for that reason. Not a whole lot of people carrying spare transfer cases in the back of their
Right.
Jeeps or
Yeah.
transmissions or steering gearboxes and things like that. So
Mhm.
it's important to know the limitations of what you're working with versus what your expectations are for performance. So if you get to a point like in your case, like, I've been to Moab a couple times, I've done this, I've done that, I'm ready to step it up. I throw my 40s on, I do my e-lockers. Well, have you got an aftermarket cage yet? Have you done this? Have you upgraded your brakes for those bigger tires? Have you upgraded your steering? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a
Right.
long list of stuff.
It's a
And it just,
domino effect. It really is.
it is.
Some people just think, well, I got, the 35s and the 3.5-inch lift, and I went up to 37s and, 4-inch lift. And, when I was on 35s when I started all this, and I didn't stair step up. I went from 35s to 40s. I skipped that middle ground. And it really is a domino effect. It's not just the tires, but is everything. Now it's long
Yep.
arms, and now it's this, and it is the steering. And I have RCVs on the front now, and I have, I'm, getting the drive shafts and all that stuff. So yeah, it is really a domino effect. And I don't think a lot of people realize that when they start getting into the stuff, it really is never ending. It is never ending what you want to do to this Jeep, and to make it perform the way that you want to. Having the e-locker in the back made a world of difference, but I started out with open diffs on 35s. And I think that made me a better wheeler, or got me to where I am today, because I learned how to finesse the throttle. I learned how to feel the grab. I learned how to, crawl up without slipping and sliding and do all the stuff. And I transferred over to the limited slip before I was on the 35s. So I learned how to engage those, and how to feel that, and how much space I needed to kind of get those to engage. And then went up to 40s and still had the limited, the bump, the whole famous Moab bump, right? So 40s with the limited slip, it was bound to just blow up. So it did. And so now the e-locker, it was brand new going to Moab. And I'll tell you what, just flipping those two switches for the front and rear, I was like, oh my God, where has this been all my life? But it really is kind of like a cheat code. It really is. And I feel
It
like
is.
you have to have your rite of passage of open diffs or LSDs before you get there. And it turns you into a better wheeler. So yeah,
Absolutely. It's the best tool that you can have at your disposal is having your skill set
mhm,
better than what your rig can handle. If you
right.
have the skills to do it and exceed what your rig is capable of, that's when you're on the level of, in my opinion, personally and professionally. That's
Right.
that's me talking. Not everybody's the same. But once you're there, then you can start looking into doing those mods and upgrades. And there's nothing wrong with skipping a few steps. For a lot of
Mhm.
people, it does become, and it's a financial thing. I
It
can
really
only
is.
afford to do a spacer lift and mild 35-inch, all terrains
Mhm.
right now, but I want it right now, so that's what I'm going to do. And
Right.
they'll wheel it like that for a little bit, and then they go to a couple of runs. They go to a couple of
Mhm.
meetups, and they spend some time around the folks that have the 37s and the selectable lockers and the chromoly axial shafts, and they go, I'm watching what they're doing, and that looks like it's a whole lot of fun. I want to try
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And one of two things happens. They either tear theirs up and they go, man, I should have just done that to begin with. Or like you did, they ease themselves into it and go, okay, yeah, I can see where this does help, because the level of difficulty of the trails you're navigating is what's going to dictate where some of those mods will come in more handy than others. Having a 12,000-pound capacity rated winch on the front of your Jeep can be a lot of fun and a good thing for certain activities, but for your average Jeeper, it's way overkill.
Right.
If you're a guy that's going out, or girl, and you like to help and play rescue, or you do that as a, some kind of, you're a first responder or something, well then,
Mhm.
yeah, you want that extra capacity and power. But if you realistically, if you're just using the winch for yourself for your own recovery, the standard description that most industry people will tell you is you want a winch that's rated for 1.5 times the curb weight of your vehicle. So
Right.
if you're driving around in a 5,500-pound Jeep, you need at least a 9,500-pound capable winch, 9,500 to 10,000-pound rated winch. Same thing with gears. There's an average that you will see for most Jeepers on 37s with a V6 and an automatic transmission, regardless of transfer case. Most people on 37s are rolling around on 48s. It seems to be in the last 10 years or so, that is like the go-to ratio for wheelers that are not trailer queens. They're driving it, but they're also wheeling it, and pretty sincere about their wheeling as far as trail
Right.
ride, rock, and that kind of thing. So you can go based on those, but again, it's better to spend the time to educate yourself and do the research to understand, if I do 513s instead of 48s, what's that going to mean? If I do a limited slip versus a selectable locker, what's that going to mean?
Right.
Cause, effect, blah, blah, blah. And again, when in doubt, get with somebody that has it and see
Right.
it work. I'm
Right.
sure you guys at EJS got to see a whole slew of all different levels
Oh,
of build, from,
yes.
6 figures down to absolute shit boxes.
Right.
Everybody's having a good time. You don't have to have that 6-figure build to
Right.
have fun and be safe. Doesn't hurt anything, but it's not a have to. And if
Right.
you do decide to go in levels of your build, start with the functionality and safety aspects first, and worry about the frills and the fun stuff later. It's
Right.
more important, like lockers before light bars. You've heard people say that around campfires and on social media, you know.
Yes.
But it depends on what you're doing with it. So you have to be honest with yourself, and don't get caught up in the keeping up with the Joneses mentality of, well, all my girlfriends have 37s and beadlocks, I guess I need them too. Do you?
You
Is
really
that money
don't.
well spent for you? Is your
Right.
budget allow for that? Is that something? Do you want the headache of having to maintain beadlocks and
Mhm.
understand what that means?
Right.
Are you going to pay somebody else to do it for you? You have to answer all those questions before you just run off and spend $4,000 on a set of wheels and tires.
Right.
So
Right. No, I completely agree. And you've given us a ton of information. The listeners, so obviously Greg is very experienced and he's very knowledgeable about what he's talking about and what he does. As we mentioned before, it's over 30 years of experience doing this. And obviously the rigs that he works on speak for themselves, especially his own rig. He beats it up. If you ever find him on Facebook, he is a very extreme wheeler, and his rig
it's not
is
pretty, but it does work.
it's a beast. It's a beast. And he's doing buggy lines and doing all this other stuff. So if you have any questions, look up Platinum Drive Trainworks on Facebook or Instagram, shoot him a message or reach out to the shop, give him a call, and he can answer anything that's
Absolutely.
going on. Schedule a time to come in and talk to him and go over what your needs are. If you're far away, give him a call and see about, getting into the shop. So Greg, thank you so much for being with us today. That's going to be it for this episode of Chic Chat. We hope you've been inspired by the stories, insights, and tips and knowledge that was shared today. Remember, there are no limits to what you can achieve when you embrace your passion and fearlessly chase your dreams. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the Jeep Talk Show so you'll never miss an episode and all this knowledge that we're sharing. Remember, embrace the thrill of the off-road, embody your own unique style, and always keep pushing the boundaries of what you thought was possible, because anything is possible. Thanks, Greg. We appreciate it today.
I appreciate y'all. Thank you so much for the invite.
Right. Of course.
Broadcasting since 2010.
You're my friend. You're my new friend.